Hey, Graylog Go. I hope you're having an awesome time this weekend. My name is Ashley Sequera, and I'll be talking to you about how I did research into illicit streaming devices leveraging Graylog. Very quick agenda. So, I'll be talking about me. I'll talk about the background. So, why did I get into this? Why did I need to look into this? And then how I set up my lab. And then we'll do a little bit of entry level threat hunting. My career has pretty much been in cybersecurity since, we'll call it 2017. I used to work in a SOC. I actually got poached out of Palo Alto's veteran free training class. I got to be a firewall trainer. I was a consultant. I was a security operations systems engineer for Cortex. And then I ended my time with Palo as the trainer for Cortex. I then went to Google, spent about 2 years there, and now I am trying the first toe into startup land at Cyware Labs as a sales engineer. I'm also a PhD student at New Mexico Tech. I'm an Army veteran. I did 13 years. Yay, choices that I might revisit for 100, Alex. I consider myself a baby threat researcher, kind of new to this, but I think it's really fascinating. I think it's really interesting. And again, I just really, really love cybersecurity stuff. So, with that, let's dive into the background here. And I want you to think about someone in your life that you really care about, your mom, your dad, whomever it is. Now imagine that, whomever that person is that you care about did something like brought home a weird device that you've never heard of. It's causing problems on their network. And so, like any logical person would, you buy one so you can analyze it at home. And so that's more or less what I did. Some key terms here. So, what is an illicit streaming device? So, we all have streaming devices. Like, I can look at my Apple TV right now. I think we got some Roku's, in the guest room or something. I've got a Nintendo Switch. I can stream on that. So, what is an illicit streaming device? So, the word illicit means it's not something you should necessarily be doing or it may not be good. So, these are kind of like if you had a black box in the 90s, if you're in the United States, you probably remember like people would be like, hey, you want to come over and watch the Tyson fights? I got a black box. Like they would just be loud about it. But the idea is that it's just this thing that just pumps signal and you don't have to pay for like those premium channels. These devices are pretty much the same. They're simple set top boxes. They're designed in such a way that it's easy to just plug in and it just works. So, a black box. Now, the illicit streaming devices come with wild promises of fantastic things. And I really mean that. Wild promises, what do I mean? Hey, you don't have to pay for like pay-per-views, no NFL Sunday ticket, like nothing. You just pay like $100, $50, $300. I mean, I had a close family member come to me and say, "Hey, guess what? Guess what? I got this cool thing. You should check it out. It just works. You just pay $300 and it just works." Okay, that again, it sounds too good to be true. It probably is. So again, it could be a set top box, it could be the Cody sticks, etc. Now, something I found interesting when I first started digging into this was that 6% of US homes, 6% have one of these things. And that was back in 2019. We just all came out of COVID, and I'm sure we all have horror stories about the security things we might have seen, the things that our close family members were doing. Everybody got sent home to work from home. So now there's these flat networks, tons of attack surface. You might have heard about the engineer who was targeted through his home router at his house. So again, bringing devices that you don't know what they do onto your home network isn't the best idea. Some current events for you to really drive this home. The FBI just took down a Chinese IoT botnet the other day. We've had Salt Typhoon identified as hacking into the ISPs. We just had another news article come out about the US wiretap system. So these things and these events, they could be related. We don't know yet. But again, everything is potentially a vector. And that's really the takeaway that I want to leave you with, is that anything and everything, if it connects to the internet, hell, even if it doesn't in some cases, especially with air gap machines, it's a vector. Now, before the Chinese IoT botnet that we just found out about got taken down, I found this article called Investigating IPTV Malware in the Wild. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, in the wild, like, what do you mean? So I get the paper, I read it. It's really well done. Shout out to those authors, 100%. If you are looking for a link for it, connect with me on LinkedIn after. Happy to share because it's a great read. But they had a whole framework that they used to analyze the links and things that people will go to. So, like, oh, you want to watch the new Spider-Man movie before it's out on streaming? Cool, I got you. Like, go to this link. Now, fun fact, there's been drive-by downloads on those links. So, not trying to call anybody out right now, but if you happen to be one of those people that likes to use those little sketchy links, you better look twice because there might be more going on than you realize. So, they had a whole framework. They found that like at least half of the sites that they were visiting, a lot of them had tons of malware. There was even another article spacing on the name. I know it was last year, maybe 2022, but they were talking about how there was like 1.6 million devices infected with malware that were these types of devices. So those are the reasons why I'm using and looking at these types of devices. The other thing is like I just have privacy questions. You know, no company is perfect. We all know this. We all have heard, oh, we protect your privacy. We really care about your data. They get breached. We're like, no, you didn't. But again, that's our risk in having to participate in the world that requires a cell phone or participate in a world where all job applications are done online. Like we have to be on the internet. So we can't fully remove the risk in that way. Well, we kind of can if we're using the right type of device. So if I'm using, say, my Apple TV, like I walk into Best Buy or Target, wherever you want to go, your favorite digital retailer, and I'll go in there and I'll say, hey, I want an Apple TV. I say, cool, it's over here. Give us your money. I give them my money. I go home. I open the box. I plug it in, and I can start downloading my apps. Looking at network traffic for my Apple TV. The most annoying thing it does is try to connect over AirPlay a lot. But aside from that, that's really the only kind of busybodiness of that device. Now, this device is spooky with a capital S. I know it's October. That's not why I said spooky. I really mean spooky, guys. Like, I should turn off the lights and make it all dark in here for a second. Like, spooky. And what do I mean by that? Well, again, I mentioned that AirPlay is, kind of chatty on the network with an Apple TV. And again, I have tons of Apple devices. I got a Mac. Like they're all trying to do AirPlay. And like if you've ever clicked on like your sound in your Mac and you see like your normal devices appear and you might see like your AirPlay devices appear. That's why, because it's always looking to see if it can do AirPlay. So again, I expect that. What I don't expect is a single device ARPing so much and so often that it's creating 1,000 packets just to ARP one device. I don't expect a device to be so interested in what I have going on in my network and at my house that it is making other devices ARP for itself. I don't know a lot of these IP addresses or domains that it was connecting to. And again, it's a pirate streaming box, so of course it's going to be sketchy, but like some of these were a little too sketchy, if you get what I'm saying. Now, the final nail in the coffin for this thing is that it had an app store that if I turned on Google Play Protect, it wouldn't install it at all. It would fail every time. Couldn't download it, couldn't do anything with it. It was just stuck. So knowing that, of course I'm thinking, well, maybe like I should look into like the IP it's trying to get the app store from. Like that's kind of how this all started. And so as I'm digging into these devices, as I'm trying to understand like exactly what's going on, of course I come home from, you know, visiting the close family member that told me about this. And of course I immediately buy one. So I got one, I set it up in my lab. And again, I'm kind of new to this. I at least knew enough in the beginning that I should probably segment it with my firewall, make sure that my firewall is not in the equation at the very least. So I did do that. I struggled in the beginning trying to figure out, I'm like, how the heck do you do packet captures at the house? Never really thought about like, okay, I'm at my house. How do I capture packets? Like, I was doing all kinds of weird stuff and then I gave up and I was like, oh, wait, I spent too much money on a Black Friday Hack 5 sale. I have a packet squirrel. So I learned how to use a packet squirrel for this too. And so I used that to grab PCAPs in line. And I'll talk more about that later. But once I had kind of like watched it do some stuff, I saw it calling out to some IPs and I was like, I kind of don't like that. That's a little weird. Saw some weird apps in my Palo, at layer 7. I'm like, okay, let me see what's really going on here. So why did I go to Graylog? A few reasons. The most important reason is at the bottom. I'll talk about it in a second. But these devices are making like so much noise, so much traffic. It was taking a lot of work to just kind of look in my Palo and aggregate it manually. I did those PCAPs with the packet scroll, as I mentioned, but these PCAPs were big. They were anywhere from like 200K packets in like a few minutes to almost 7 million packets when I let it run overnight and capture packets. 7 million packets for one device. Now, I had my logs on my Palo Alto. The Palo Alto does a pretty good job with logs, considering that it's a firewall and it's not supposed to be like like a log aggregator. But I wanted to pivot on data. I wanted the logging to make sense. I wanted it to be easy. I wanted it to be clear, and I needed a tool that had dark mode. Let's be real. Looking at these types of devices and looking at stuff in this space, you might have to be looking at weird hours of the night, your daytime versus what you think might be their nighttime, stuff like that. I don't want to come sit down at my desk and be blinded when I open a UI. Dark mode is everything. So I picked Graylog because I had dark mode. Now, the big thing here is that dashboards help a lot for my SOC analysts and my other folks and different types of analyst roles out there. You know that a dashboard is everything. Give me the quick down and dirty about what I need to know right now. So when we think about how we build a dashboard, we have to ask ourselves three questions. And I ask myself these three questions a lot during this process. What information are you trying to track? Well, I mentioned that it's visiting some weird domains, some weird IPs. So maybe I want to see how often that happens. What metric? Again, often, time, data packet size, amount. Like there's a lot of different ways you could define a metric. And then finally, who's it going to be important to? Like, I can't go to my elderly neighbors and say, hey, do you want to hear about these cool dashboards I built in a SIEM? They're not going to know what I'm talking about. So as you're designing this, like know who your audience is going to be. If you end up in a situation where you have something major happen, maybe you have to produce logs, you have to revisit something. Maybe HR has reached out and they're like, hey, we need to know this thing right now. Fine, I have a dashboard. Or I now know that my audience for that information is someone who might require information off of that dashboard. So we're going to pivot. I'm going to go to my setup and I'm going to kind of just walk you through, again, what I was doing on my firewall, how I set up syslog, because I do use syslog as an input, and then what I actually set up on Graylog. I mentioned in the beginning that I had a little bit of trouble kind of figuring out the best way to really go about this. I had things doing PCAPs, I had my firewall, I had all this stuff, but I didn't have a good way to keep it all aggregated into one place. I came to my firewall, I figured out how to use syslog. Again, pretty simple. You just hit plus and you create your server, which I did. For the rest of our conversation today, the IP address for my server will be that 202.252. I'm using UDP port 514, and fun fact, the standard application ID for syslog on the firewall. This is where I had some interesting outcomes. You need a delimiter to work with Graylog because it allows you to do parsing and it makes it a little bit easier to just read your messages as they come in. I tried commas. I personally, it just bugs me when like everything's touching the comma Reformed English major over here. Like there has to be a space after the comma. So I went with the pipe symbol. And I was worried at first because I thought maybe it would cause some other issues in Linux, but at least for my setup, piped worked really well. And because I'm focused kind of tightly here, I just wanted threat, traffic, URL, and data logs. Now, that being said, if I'm a sysadmin or maybe I'm the person that's helping with like availability and things, the system and the config logs might be something worth sending to syslog. So now you have an infrastructure support use case potentially to get your boss to buy you Graylog. So there's other stuff in here. There are things like decryption, tunnel, wildfire, etc. But I'm just sticking with just these four log types for now because as you'll see, it's a lot of data. Once I have that configured, I popped over to Graylog and I spent a lot of time trying to understand why I shouldn't just put everything into the default stream. You can now see that I did figure out not to put everything in the default stream. And so for my lab itself, my security operations lab, it's literally just called the 203 because that's the subnet that I'm working in. And that's the SecOps lab. So anything that is from the SecOps lab zone is being piped into the SecOps lab stream. Anything from my internal LAN zone, which is down here, or anything from my IoT net here, those are also going into their own stream. So already I'm filtering out a lot of the noise because again, I don't necessarily want the rest of the traffic from my other two subnets. I have firewall policies in place that allow them not to communicate with one another, especially not with this one when I have these weird devices on the network. Knowing that, I don't really want to also just be trying to sift through all the logs of all three things coming into one pipe. That's why I didn't use the default stream. Within the SecOps lab stream, which is where all of the interesting traffic is, you'll see I've got stuff coming in. I can see that it's a traffic log. I can see that there's my firewall. I can see the name of the policy, the source IP, destination IP. This is NAT source IP. So this is my public IP. Please don't dox me. And then NAT destination IP. Now, I do have the option, and I did play around with this, that if I wanted to create extractors and do fields, I could do that and pin it across the top here. But for me, it's less about kind of monitoring the logs in this way and more about, what event types might be happening. I did take some time to understand how to set up alerts and events. So I have two event definitions that I designed for this conversation. Again, I mentioned that weird app store before. I built an event called Suspicious IP App Store, very intuitive. And I included, I used ChatGPT, made some quick little remediation steps just to have something in here. But what this is doing is it's looking for this particular IP, which is the one I observed in my logs. And if there's a hit, it lets me know. I did the same thing with there. I saw something weird actually. It was doing like a local DNS resolution, super sketchy. Anyway, I saw that in the logs, and so I made a query for that as well. And now it's called unauthorized local DNS event definition. Something else I did just to help us all understand how this could potentially work. I made a quick little web server with Flask, and it's just waiting for a webhook. And so I can send an HTTP alert from Graylog, and it pops up on the screen. With all of these different kind of settings, this was not a sit down and design it. I will be completely frank with all of you. This took a lot of nights, a lot of trial and error. I remember the day I set up Graylog, I couldn't figure out how to get logs in it. Like it took way too long. I felt like to get logs in it. As a SOC person, formerly, I now have a newfound understanding for all of my security engineering friends because you have to sit there and you have to work with us and work with your analysts and your threat intel people and your bosses in IT and make sure that you have correctly defined your scope of what you actually need to monitor, but at the same time, you still have to monitor all of it. So again, there's power in having a device that helps you with this. Last couple things I'll show you. I am running Community Edition, by the way. So if you're worried, like, oh my gosh, I need Enterprise, you don't. I did this with Community Edition. I did want to take a moment to make sure that we understood how the pipelines themselves worked. So I have a stream. I'm going to pick my internal LAN just so you can see, right? It's getting stuff. We're getting logs. If I turn it on, we're going to start seeing stuff come in here while we're waiting. Great. If I go back to that stream and I look at the stream itself and I say edit stream, all we're doing here is giving it a title, giving it a description, and then I'm putting it into the index set of Graylog investigation events. And I want to remove it from the default stream. Remember what I mentioned about not wanting to have to sift through all the logs in one place? I just thought it would be cleaner to just remove those logs from the default stream. The other thing you have to do to get these to work is you need to set up a rule. So if you look at this rule here, it's actually really straightforward. So you can actually load a message that came in, and with that particular event type, or sorry, input type, you can actually load a message from a particular server, and it will load a sample message. What I said was, okay, the message has to contain IoT, just to keep it simple, has to contain IoT. So if you look up here, IoT is there. Yes, that works. This is a sample message. And if I were to test this, if it wasn't already created, it would actually let me test it. So if I come in here, again, you can see contain IoT. I gave it a description. And when you're first creating it, you can test it and it will let you know if it's going to match or not. So that piece is done. Then for the pipeline itself, over here for IoT device network, again, this is pretty straightforward too. You just give it a name, you give it a description. I edit the connections. And so right now, this is where it gets a little confusing, but I'll take the time to try to explain it hopefully correctly. When you are dealing with your pipelines, you want to pull them from the default stream, because your stream that you are using to feed into the pipeline, okay, your stream that you're using to feed into the pipeline is going to have those extracted values from the default stream. If I switch it to the other pipeline, it's not going to get anything. So this has to be the default stream. And then as far as stages, again, nothing complicated, just all the rules on this stage match the message. Okay, great. So again, I have a pipeline. I have a rule within that pipeline. There is a simulator if you need to check it or you want to check it. And then I have my streams over here. The one that we'll be looking at is the SecOps lab stream. All right, let's get into the demonstration and our real life threat hunting. I have Graylog up and I have my search set to from 5 minutes ago until now. I've got the stream that I'm interested in. Right now, not running the logs, as they say, because I want to show you how you can take one of your initial queries and then use that so that you can create an alert. So, taking a look at everything going on, there are a few things that I'm generally interested in because, again, I don't know what a lot of this traffic does. And if I think I see what could be beaconing, then I may want to dig a little deeper on that and be informed that it does seem to be beaconing. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to where it says message. And again, I know this isn't perfect because I haven't done like my fields and all that kind of stuff. But again, I set this up just for this conversation. I'm going to spend some more time tightening this up after the talk. So when I get all the questions about why didn't you do fields, it's on the list. All right. So here's my message. I can click on it and this menu pops up. Now, I'm just going to copy this entire value. Now, I already had another screen up. And I mentioned before that the App Store was what I was curious about. So what I can actually do is paste in this entire query. And if you look over here, you'll see that there's a bunch of different things that popped up. This is where pipes might get you. So what you can do is you can use the good old quotes trick. And if I put it in quotes, then I get just that alert. I'm going to leave it. And again, I know that if you do the pipes, you can string together additional queries. As I kind of massage this and continue to build this out, because again, this is a very, very early first attempt at this, I'm going to iterate over it a lot of times. And so would love to hear suggestions after the talk on what people think might be good fields or good information to potentially pivot on. All right, so I have it set to search within the last 12 hours. I want it to check every 5 minutes. It's enabled. And then what this means is, do I want to create an event for that definition if the filter has results? Or do I want to do it when the aggregation reaches a certain threshold? So if we see it like 10 times, do you want to alert? Again, I'm going to keep it really simple. I'll just say because the filter has results. This is where you can set additional fields, but I'm going to leave that alone for now. Now, this is where I can set my notification. So if you recall earlier, I mentioned I set up a little server that's listening for a webhook. Now, this is all local, but if you have products that do support webhooks, that's exactly the same way that you would actually just configure the webhook URL within Graylog, and then you can send those alerts from Graylog to that device. So looking at this, this is already set. I set a grace period of 5 minutes. So basically, how long should Graylog wait before it lets you know again if it sees it again? If you have it set to say like 5 seconds, it would be like, hitting quite a bit, especially if there's a lot of traffic going to a particular IP or matching a particular query. So once it's done, again, I did my little remediations and stuff. I'll go ahead and update the event definition, and then we wait a little bit. But, oh, what's this? 13 minutes ago, looks like we had a hit. So on the beaconing IP rule that I designed, something happened. Ooh, look at that. So now we have an alert for this beaconing IP. And I can actually expand it. I can see a few things, but something really handy that I like is you can click replay search, and then it pulls you right back to that particular log so that you can take a look and, again, make whatever choice you need to make. Now, what I'm curious to know is as I add fields, I am interested to see how different it might look as I start adding additional fields. So this part's done. I'll go back. Let's look and see if maybe some stuff is happening on our other alerts. Okay, not as frequently, but I just wanted to kind of show you an example of what this could look like. Now, the last part that I think is pretty cool, like pretty cool, the webhook updater, little web server that I made. So if you look, there's our whole query with all the information that we might want. Now, again, I recognize that this is literally the most simple web page. Again, I'm not a great developer. I don't pretend to be. I just threw something together that I knew would work and work in a pinch. So you could take this and you could design it into whatever you want. But again, there's a lot of different ways to dig into this stuff. So don't be afraid to go after your data. Don't be afraid to collect your data because you never know. You might see that one thing where you're like, wait a minute, that's weird. And you wouldn't have had it if you didn't collect your logs, do your PCAPs, or set up a SIEM so that you could make it easier on yourself as you're working through these data sets. Final kind of takeaways: understand your traffic flows. If you have a certain, like if you know, like you have a bunch of, like you have a Nintendo Switch and a PS5, and you have all these cool things, say in like your home network, or at your business, you have computers and servers and phones and all these things, know what normal looks like. One of the reasons why it kind of flagged and caught my eye so quickly that the devices I was researching were doing something weird is because the first thing I noticed was that they were going to places I'd never really paid attention to or had never even seen in my environment. And that's a big deal. Another thing that will help is think about what's important. And keep in mind that that can evolve over time while you're investigating something, while you're digging into something. When I started, I was kind of honed in on one specific thing. And as I've spent more time digging into these devices, I have found more and more and more. And it's like now kind of snowballing as far as scope and, all of the possibilities with a device of this nature. Finally, read the manual. I can't tell you how many times I was struggling with something, and it's literally because I did not read the manual. All right, last check here before we wrap things up. Let's see if we got anything new. Ooh, looks like we got a match. So, what happens if we check our alerts? Ooh, we have a suspicious IP app store too. Ooh, and now we can see how we get all the remediation steps. We get the timestamp. Now, here's where if you want to do fields, this would be a perfect place to do fields because maybe you do get like the IP and you get those other values and things. Let's see if our webhook worked. Kind of interested to see if this changes. Oh, it kind of did. It I don't know why it output like that, but the data is here. It's just not word wrapped, I guess. So again, not a developer. I'll need to troubleshoot that. But just again, giving you some more examples on different things that you can do with Graylog. I'll open it up for questions. Thanks.